Hello everyone, Mitchen here. Today I'm going to be showing you my Charizard EX deck list that is maybe a little bit different from the normal Zard lists you've been seeing recently. This one is almost a pseudo-control Charizard list that is kind of meant to just be able to do anything you want. And it's actually really good, so we're going to get into it and I'll talk through some of the cards in this deck. I'll mention a couple in particular that are quite the standouts. I'll talk about a little bit what they do, why they're in here, as well as the standard Charizard stuff, why we play all the cards. The usual kind of thing I do in these videos, go through the deck, talk about the counts and the cards that we play, and hopefully you guys enjoy. So let's get into it. Starting off with our core Pokemon, we've got 4 Charmander. So I play 3 of the Heat Tackle one, and then 1 70 HP Ember Charmander. The reason for that is because Heat Tackle primarily is definitely the best attack on Charmander right now. It's really useful for 1 energy, you can do 30 damage. There's a lot of things that you can do to fix math with it. In little scenarios, you poke at opposing Charizard EX with it, it can actually help a lot. It's also kind of useful for killing itself, which is kind of weird. But the damage that it does to itself can sometimes be good to force control decks to take a prize card if you can use Heat Tackle enough. And there's a lot of things you can unlock with that. So Heat Tackle overall is probably the best Charmander right now. The reason I play the 170 HP is sort of a little bit of respect for something like Sableye. It's nice to have a 70 HP option. And also the Ember attack in certain scenarios can be pretty good. So I do like having the 1-of option in there for that. Then I play 1 Charmeleon, the Heat Veil version. This is the one with the ability that it cannot be damaged, or sorry, cannot be affected by effects of attack, which means you cannot be damaged by things like Sableye's Lost Mine, but it also means you're also proof to things like the TM Devolution, so you cannot devolve the Charmeleon as well, which is really good. And for that ability alone, I think this is definitely the best Charmeleon to play right now. Then our main attacker itself, Charizard EX, we're playing 3 copies. Not much to say about that. It's just a good Pokemon, our main attacker, so we do want a chunk of them, and 3 is extremely standard in decks like this. Then we've got our 2 Pidgey, playing the 50 HP Call for Family versions for the Call for Family attack. Is definitely worth the 10 less HP. Call for Family can actually be a really good attack in certain situations, like first turn going second to help you set up your board. And then we've got our 2 Pidgeot EX, Pokemon. That's going to be our main support engine. Let us find the cards that we need, combo pieces to do things like Rare Candy Charizard easily. And then from there, quick search out, like boss, whatever supporter we want, any card we want once per turn. It's just a really good engine. And it's also got free retreat. Then I've got Radiant Charizard. This Pokemon is really good right now in Charizard decks. In the past, it's kind of been on and off, but Radzard, I think you'll see, is pretty much in every list right now. It's a really good 1-prize attacker, in Combustion Blast being a great attack in the mid to late game. Then I've also got a Manaphy because Chien-Pao is definitely really strong right now. Even Lost Box, actually, both decks are a little more popular in the Temporal Forces format now since rotation than they were previously. So Manaphy is definitely really important right now, protecting our bench from things like Radiant Greninja. Then we've got our first pretty interesting card in this deck that you're probably a little surprised by. We're playing Regieleki. This used to be called Bad Lecky back in the day when the Regi deck was popular. Because its attack was less desirable in Targeted Bolt than the other Regieleki for attacking. But we're not really here for Targeted Bolt. We're actually here for Electromagnetic Sonar. For 1, colorless energy, it lets you put a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand. It's also got 130 HP, which is pretty notable. I'm going to talk through a little bit more about what this card can do as we get to some of the other cards that you want to recycle it for. But overall, what you need to know about this card is this alone kind of lets you beat Control, comboed with one other card in this deck. It can also be used to recycle a lot of the 1-of or even multiple of trainers in this deck to let you play a sort of Control-esque style in cards like, I'll just tell you, Airy is in this. So you can use Airy, recover Airy, use it again later. Devolution, same case. It lets us play 1-of trainers that are really strong, but we can even recycle them and use them again to just completely cripple decks like in the Mirror or Chien-Pao. And there's a lot of other cool things with the cards later that I'll tell you as well. But Regieleki is really good. Then we've got Rotom V. Instant charge ability there lets us set up turn 1. We get this out, draw some cards, lets us find our combo of Candy Pidgeot, Candy Zard a lot easier. And it's also a Forest Seal Stone target. Rotom's become pretty commonplace in the Zard decks now, so that's pretty good. And then the last Pokemon is Lumineon V. This one's not as 100% in every Zard deck, but I still think Fish is really good. Luminous Sign, just finding a supporter. Sometimes our hand is really dead, and we not only need something like a forest target, but we actually need to go like Ultra Ball is our only search card. We've got 1. We get Lumineon for Arven. It gets Forest, Sealstone, and something like a Poffin. So it gives us from a singular Ultra Ball out and a rather dead hand otherwise, a chance to still set up our board really strongly. And it's also potentially good in the late game when you might have some ball search and you need to quick search for something else. You can go Luminion for boss and then use quick search for another piece. So if you need 2 pieces to close the game, there's that as well. So I still think Luminion's really good in this deck. Then we've got our supporters. I'm playing 3 Arven. People play 3 or 4. 4 is obviously nice to have, but you need space in the deck, so that's kind of why that's there. If there's cards in the deck you don't quite like, you can definitely cut for a 4th Arven. That would be a potential inclusion as like a 61st, 62nd card consideration. But I have played Charizard even before this sort of control version that I've been messing around with, on and off with 3 Arven, and it's still pretty fine. There's obviously, times where there's that slightly less inconsistency, but overall 3 Arven tends to be pretty good. And overall, it's obviously a great supporter. We'd like to play 4 if we had the space for it, for getting an item and a tool card, but we can't fit everything. But 3 Arven still tends to be pretty good in this deck. Then we've also got 3 Iono. Iono is just a really good supporter as well. Obviously for disruption, it's great for draw in the early game. Not much to say about that. It's very standard 3 Iono in decks like this right now. So we're running 3 Iono pretty good. 4 Iono is actually another really good card. We definitely don't have room to play it in a version like this. 4 Iono is something in like a very cookie cutter Charizard list without text to even beat control usually. It tends to be good against like the standard other attacking matchups, but we don't have space to play it in this. But it can be a consideration sometimes. Then as well, only 2 boss. Like I said, we do have to make space. Boss's Zard is a really good card, but we do have other gust options in this deck too. And if we ever needed it, not that it's usually optimal to recycle boss, that's usually not what Lecky's there for, but it can recycle boss just like any other trainer in this deck. But 2 boss plus we've got 2 counter catcher in the deck as well, so we do have a lot of gust options still, and that still tends to be pretty okay. Then we've got Penny. So Penny is the card that kind of combos with Regieleki to single-handedly beat most control matchups, at least the block lax that's very straightforward where they're just trying to stick a Pokemon in the active. Essentially what you can do is you have your Penny option for when they stick a Pokemon, and then from there you go Penny up your active Pokemon, you promote Regieleki, attach an energy, use Electromagnetic Radar to recycle Penny, and from there, if they ever gust another Pokemon, you do that combo again. You just literally Penny up whatever they stuck in the active, Electromagnetic Sonar recover Penny, and we're good to go. They can never trap anything. And if they ever don't gust, because eventually Blocklex does run out of counter catchers, and they can't just gust every turn. If they run out eventually, and you're just sitting with Regieleki in the active, and you don't need to recover Penny because you already have it still, then you start to recover other things like Airy to then discard their items, and we basically play reverse control against them. We actually control them instead, and we actually tend to do a better job of it. You can start using Airy to discard things like their Pal Pads, stuff like that. We can Regieleki to recover things like Super Rod to make sure we're not decking out either. We just keep recovering Super Rod to recover energies and Pokemon that we might have like discarded just to get back in the deck, things like that. Or Iono, so that way if our hand's really big, we can just never deck out that way. We just keep playing Iono. And then in the meantime, we can also just keep using Penny to attack with a Charizard. They ever stick anything, we Penny it up. You get the idea. It's pretty good. To talk a little bit more again about Airy, Airy's also not just for control, but is just a really great card right now against a lot of things. It's really good against Mirror for the rare candies in particular, Chen Pao for rare candies and retrievals, Lost Zone variants mainly for Mirage Gates, but also things like Switch cards are really good. Airy's just really powerful into the meta right now, and using even it just once on a couple good items can be really strong and swing a game, but to be able to even recover it and use it again with Regieleki is really powerful. Then for our ball search, I've got for Buddy Buddy Poffin. Of course, we need to get out our main guys in matchups where we're not just playing control. We still need to be making sure we're a consistent attacking Charizard deck. So a bunch of Poffins to search out our small guys like Charmanders and Pidgeys primarily. Then we've also got Ultra Balls. 4 of those. Get our non-basic Pokemon in most cases. Ultra Ball can still get things like Fish and, anything obviously. But, we don't want to be playing it as often for something like a Charmander. This is more to get our bigger evolution Pokemon out, like the Charmeleon, Charizard, Pidgeot, things like that. But it can always get anything, which is nice. And then to get our non-Buddy Poffin searchable basics in most cases, we've got Nest Balls, things like Rotom V in the early game. We want to make sure we're finding that, so we still play a decent amount of those. And then it can also get things like Radzard, Regieleki, whatever we need. Obviously, it can still get a Charmander and Pidgey as well. Lots of consistency, lots of ball search to make sure we're getting our Pokemon out and setting up consistently turn 1. Then, in a deck that's focused on stage 2s, obviously, we're playing 4 rare candy. Not much to be said about that. These are some of the most important items in the deck and often what people will be trying to get rid of with Airy against us. So 4 rare candy is really good just to evolve up our guys pretty easily. And also consistency. You know, sometimes we don't always use all 4, but it's good to have them. Next, got 2 counter catcher. This deck can tend to fall behind here and there. Not super behind, but you know, we like sometimes going second to play Arven and set up our board consistently, which means turn 2 our opponent's getting the first attack off and knocking out a Pokemon, and automatically we're behind on prize cards. So we tend to play the game on our turn, usually like 1 prize behind, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. It lets us do more damage as our opponent's taking more prize cards with Charizard, and it keeps our counter catchers live. So as long as we don't let them take all 6 prizes before we do, being like 1 prize behind in this deck is often a pretty good thing, actually. So counter catchers are really good, and they're also Arven searchable. Then I've got 2 Super Rod, recover things like our Pokemon and energies. Pretty standard, you know, where as you're going to see, don't play a lot of fire energy because we can search them out. So it lets us make space for other more important cards, since Infernal Rain can just accelerate them. But then, because we're playing a limited amount, we tend to need to recycle them. So that's mainly what Super Rod's for, but it also recycles our 1F Pokemon, or even just our Charizards if we've gone through too many of them and we need to increase our odds to find it in the late game to close the game. Next up, I got 1 Lost Vacuum. Really good card to have a 1 of right now, just to get rid of any pesky tools floating around and stadium bumps, because Path is gone. Most people don't play many stadiums. This deck itself only plays the 1 Collapse for the actual utility of Collapse. We don't really have stadium bumps, but you know, if our Collapse has been used, we don't really want to let our opponent have a beneficial stadium the whole game. We can use it just to get rid of it. We can use Lost Vacuum to bump a Collapse stadium to then be able to open up our option to use Collapse stadium again, because if there's a Collapse in play already, we can never use ours until that goes away. So Vacuum's good there. And like I said, tools, things like Hero's Cape, which, you know, spoiler, you're about to see in a second, we play as well. But you want to be able to make sure that card doesn't stick around, and if an opponent is playing it, or any other good tool they might want. Then I've got 1 of Switch. Even though we do play the Penny, I always like 1 Switch item in this deck. It makes it so that we can move things like a Radiant Charizard or Regieleki that start in the active that are kind of awkward to move without needing to waste our supporter for turn, particularly if we start with them. So it's like turn 2, we've set up, we go Candy Zard, Candy Pidgeot, but I kind of need to play Arven in the early turns because I need to set up, and I either can't play Arven and can't set up properly if I want to move these guys, or I can't attack because I've set up my board, but I can't now use Penny because I've already used Arven, so I can't move these guys out of the active. So I like having the 1 of Switch item option to move things like that. Then go into tools. First off, we got a Forest Sealstone, really good 1 of that's Arven searchable, so we don't need more than 1, and we can just find it, stick it on our Rotom Feed that tends to be down in the early game, and help us get our combo pieces like our board wide turn 1, or just Candy Zard, Candy Pidgeot turn 2, or if we can save it and we don't need to use it, we can hold it for the late game for when we're getting Iono'd to like 1 or 2 cards, and you know, we can only get 1 card with Pidgeot, but maybe we need an extra. Just gives us an out in the late game as well. Really good card, obviously, in a deck that's playing Vs and doesn't have an inherent V-Star ability. So Forest Sealstone just really good. Then Hero's Cape. So this is another one that's maybe a little less common in Charizard decks right now, but I think this card is actually really good and really underrated. A lot of people see Hero's Cape and their general response is just, oh, well, what if they vacuum it away? Yeah, sure, it can be lost vacuumed away, but you don't really put Hero's Cape down the second you see it on the first Pokemon you have in a matchup that can play Lost Vacuum and easily find it, like the Mirror, right? You're not going to put this down turn 3 after your opponent's set up, they're stable, Candy Zard, Candy Pidgeot. There's nothing in particular they need to quick search for, so they'll just quick search Lost Vacuum and get rid of it. Obviously that can happen, but the way you want to use this card is actually a lot for matchups that don't even play Lost Vacuum 1, but also in the Mirror it's really good in the later game when your opponent, like I said, needs multiple cards. They can't just go quick search for Lost Vacuum because they need to put a Charizard in play to close the game, and they already need Candy Charizard, and now we've Hero's Caped and they need Lost Vacuum as well. It actually really puts strain on a deck like this in the late game when you've already Iono'd them to like 1 or 2 cards and they need multiple pieces. Sometimes they just can't deal with the Hero's Cape and it gets value. But the other reasons Hero's Cape's in here is for the decks that don't play Lost Vacuum. This card massively swings matchups like Lugia, which tends to be considered a bad prize trading matchup for Charizard if they set up consistently because Chinchinos just blow up our Charizards and they're only worth 1 prize. Hero's Cape makes it that Chinchinos need 7 energy to one-shot a Charizard EX, which 1 means they might not even be able to do it because unless they've already prepped a bunch of energy on a Chinchino, which in that case you just Gust Kill that, or Gust Kill the Archeops, right, things like that. But unless they already have 2 energy on a Chinchino going into their turn to then go attach and Primal Turbo to get another 5, totaling 7 special energy and Cinccino. It's not even possible for them to Oko the Zard in one turn. And then on top of that, even if they manage to pull off like a 7 energy Cinccino, Hero's Cape makes it that there's a big strain on their energy, and it makes it a lot easier for them to run out of energy, which is also really good. Against Chien-Pao, similar situation. They need all 8 water energies on a Chien-Pao to blow up the Charizard EX with Hero's Cape on it, which means if they ever prize a single water energy in like the early to mid game that they haven't taken yet, it's just not possible for them to Oko the Zard. And even if they get there, it makes their resources strain so much. Usually, like it's hard to get 8 energy out that fast in the early game. And then if they do get it, they tended to need like 2 retrievals probably, which combined with things like airy pressure means we can run them out of retrievals and once again run them out of energy, just like Lugia. Another cool thing you can do is you can slap Hero's Cape on Regieleki in matchups that have sort of board locked themselves out of a lot of damage output, and you can just loop Hero's Caped Regieleki. They attack into it. Like if we run them out of Gust or in a matchup like Chien-Pao that doesn't really have a lot of targeted Gust, you can go Regieleki, Hero's Cape in the active. They attack into it. We penny it up. We put it back down, attach all their stuff. Pidgeot has free retreat. We go back into it. They attack into it. We penny it up. We basically just penny loop our Regieleki and make sure we never deck out because we can use electromagnetic sonar to get things. And they just sort of lose, right? Like if they can't put cards back in their deck. We've got a bigger deck. They've burned through their deck faster. Something like Chien-Pao doesn't really play any way to stop themselves from decking out anymore, like an Iono with a big hand. Obviously, they got rods, but so do we. So things like that. There's so many niche scenarios you can find, and I find Hero's Cape's also just generally good into anything, right? Like just extra HP, if it doesn't get Lost Vacuum, is just generally good, as opposed to something like a Max Belt, where if it's not an EX matchup, it's useless. So Hero's Cape is really good. I don't want to talk too much more about it because I've been probably going for too long on this one card already, but I think this card's really good. Finally, or sorry, not finally, we've got our last couple tools, Defiance Band and Devolution. I'll talk about Defiance Band first. Once again, like Counter Catcher, we tend to be behind a little bit, even if we're not out of the game, so the extra damage mod is nice. I like Defiance Band as my damage mod of choice because it's basically doing all the other mods' jobs, other than something like Max Belt, but, like Vitality Band, Choice Belt, it does all of them as long as we're behind. It's just 30 damage against anything, which is really good, and you can, one, play around being behind, and you know that you're playing Defiance Band, so you can play accordingly. But also, we just tend to be behind anyways, and so it's just generally pretty good. So yeah, Choice Belt's obviously like good against something like Control matchup where they never take prize cards to be able to just Oko a Rotom V, or in neutral against a V-Star deck where we want to be able to use Radiant Charizard to do 280. But Defiance Band, if played around correctly, can just be 30 plus damage against anything, which I really like it for. And then our final tool is Devolution, really good against the Stage 2 decks. Combined with Airy, we can Airy Candies into Devolution in Mirror, or against Chien-Pao, things like that. Devolution just tends to be really strong. We can even Regieleki recycle it, so we just absolutely stomp things like the Mirror and Chien-Pao. We just make it that they can't put Stage 2s in play anymore, and we just, we play Control kind of early. Even if we go down a few prize cards, we basically run them out of resources so that they can't play the game, and then we just reverse sweep them with a Charizard. So I like Devolution for that, and the recyclability with Regieleki, and in combo with Airy, you kind of get in the idea of how these pieces fall together, hopefully. Our one-of Stadium, like I mentioned, is Collapse Stadium. It's nice to have a one-of bump, but I like Collapse Stadium in particular in Charizard to get rid of liabilities. We can either take a hit on a Charizard, retreat that, and collapse it away, or because we generally have our liability in play every game in Rotom, we tend to look for like turn 2, turn 3, once Rotom served its purpose, collapse that away so we don't have a 2-prized low HP Pokemon on the board there. And it's also sometimes situationally good to just force our opponent to get rid of a Pokemon in decks like Chien-Pao where their board's really valuable. They can't really spare a bench spot. We can Collapse Stadium and they have to discard something that's probably good to screw them up a little bit in that sense, so that's also really good. And finally, the energies in this deck. We're playing 6 Fire Energy, pretty standard. You don't need a lot of them because Infernal Rain searches them out, and then we just recover them with things like Super Rod. So 6 is a really standard energy count for a long time now. But the one extra energy, playing Mist Energy, it lets us sort of like Charmeleon prevent effects of attacks done to the Pokemon it's attached to. I really like either a Mist Energy or a Jirachi to respect Lost Zone variants in some form. Both Star Requiem in Giratina and Frenzied Gouging in Lost Box, and also Stray like Frenzied Gouging actual Roaring Moon decks. And then Sableye across both Lost Zone matchups, you tend to want to have Mist Energy or Jirachi for those, but Mist Energy in particular, like I said, covers also the actual Roaring Moon decks, so there's a little bit of extra utility there. but I also really like it because we're playing Hero's Cape. You tend to just put Mist Energy on a big guy, and it's already hard for a Lost Box to deal with. If you put it on a Hero's Cape Charizard, and then, we're Ionoing them, so it's maybe a little hard for them to find Lost Vacuum, it is insanely difficult to deal with a big 430 HP Charizard for that deck. So I like Mist Energy for that reason, mainly in combination with the Hero's Cape. And that's the deck. This is my sort of pseudo-control Charizard deck that can basically just do whatever we want. It's built to be able to beat most matchups. Charizard already has pretty good matchups right now. And with the inclusion of the Regieleki to be able to beat Control and be even controlling against other matchups like Mirror or Chien-Pao that tend to be pretty close, this deck can just basically do it all. I think it's a really good play right now. Let me know what you think of it. If you think it's kind of interesting, what you like, maybe don't like in the comments below. If you did enjoy the video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.